I suppose it's because the roads of Rome, Milan and Turin are so crowded that Fiat have always made small cars. Fiat Seicento GT is one of the current crop of mini supercars. But it's nothing new for Fiat because they started with cars like this, the inimitable Fiat 500, a superb piece, it has to be said, of automotive engineering. And there's really nothing new under the sun, because when Fiat launched this car, they went over the moon about pretty girls standing up through sunroofs and touring through the streets of Turin. I suppose there's no comparison with an ugly motoring journalist standing up through the sunroof in the streets of Edgbaston, but nevertheless the delight, the thrill of driving the mighty mouse, the Fiat 500, still can't be replicated by almost anything else on the road. Delightful little car, two-cylinder motorcycle-like 500 in the back, tiny little wheels, but amazing amount of space inside, the original Doctor Who TARDIS-like interior. And you could get a family of 8 Italians in here with absolutely no trouble at all. They were also quite quick little devices. There were many tuners around, principally a Bath, that could make this little car really rock it along. Whether the road holding or the brakes were up to it, well, that depended how much money you wanted to spend. And I remember one of the period accessories and go faster modifications at the time was to tape up the gutters and the body joints with sticky tape to make it more aerodynamic. It gave you that cutting edge. And now we stay Italian. John Stanley looks at more classic Ferraris.
Beside me, I have 2 absolute classics. One has borrowed from the other, and both represent the same high standard. Let's look. This car follows in the footsteps of the famous short wheelbase 250 GT. It had virtually the same wheelbase and the same V12 Colombo engine, along with many, many racing lessons learnt from the fabulous P275. The gearbox, the independent rear suspension, they came from the Le Mans winning 250 LM, which anyone who's been to Coys will see and will relish. There are also family ties to classics like the great GTO and the fabulous P3s and P4s, which certainly are on my wall. All this, and the Daytona as its offspring, makes this everything that is sacred. The gears are tricky. They're on the other side, it's one of those gates. However, it is a sustained rhythm if you can get it. They're close ratios, and the instant shutdown with these 4 cams means that if you get it wrong, it doesn't feel at all sweet. If you get it right, you feel the most wonderful driver on the roads. This is the brand new Ferrari flagship. It replaces the Testarossa 512, the huge, powerful, old mid-engine V12. They've reverted now to the classic V12 front engine, as they had in the 275's days, and deserted what they started as a family with the Boxer. They wind tunnel tested this car for 4,800 hours. And as a result, the underside is virtually fully flared in. The whole thing is slipstreamed even underneath. It has electrically controlled seating. It has 6 CD auto changer, full aircon, power steering. There are various speeds and clever tricks all over the place. The seating, everything about it is comfort, but it's very, very fast. This car will do 200 miles an hour. And it will do it in a delightful way. You won't know the speed you're doing, you just know you are driving the Ferrari flagship. The interior, as you would expect, is beautifully trimmed. There is luggage space, complete with luggage straps behind you. There is the classic Ferrari open gate. But underneath it all, there is a sense of confidence. There are huge, huge brakes that are ventilated and drilled and won't fade on you. There is a suspension that can be flicked from sports to regular roadwork so that whatever speed you're doing, you feel safe. It is a well-balanced car. It is everything you'd expect at the top end. It is, of course, the 550 Maranello. So here we are, two beautiful cars. On the one side we have the period classic V12, and on the other we have the brand new modern front engine V12. I don't know which one, they're just works of art. I think maybe I'll just watch.
I wanted to drive that fantastic GTB. Anyway, Penelope pit stop, eat your heart out. Look what I've got to look at. Fantastic Cadillac, and I've got Tony here to tell me about it. What a wonderful car.
Right, thanks very much.
How long have you had
it? Since the early 90s, 91, 92.
And where did it come from?
It came from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania.
Oh, so you imported it?
Yeah, we imported it ourselves, yeah.
And have you done a lot of work on it? It looks amazing.
We bought it. Yeah, we bought it as a kind of a rundown kind of a wreck, and brought it back to England and totally took it to bits and did it ourselves.
Brilliant. And what year is it? What year is the car
1959. It's a 1959. Early Earl's last creation.
Okay,
before
yeah,
he retired.
tell us a story about this. This is the
Right.
guy who actually ran the company,
Well,
yeah?
Early Earl in the 1957 when the car was designed,
Okay.
and he'd become megalomania by his retirement. He was retiring, and he made them make the old car round the Buick doors, and he made them make the old car round the doors.
And what a car design it is. So it's a bit of a one-off, this design.
It's a 1 year. It was Cadillac's most ugliest car in the 50s. Yeah.
Well, that's you know, it's a
So
personal.
they say,
Do you think
anyway.
it's ugly?
Well, no, obviously I like it.
It's a beautiful car.
Yeah, right.
And I mean, look at this. This 50s styling is absolutely amazing.
Yeah.
Wouldn't look out of place in
Right.
one of these Greece or whatever. I could see you posing around in there. I mean, is that your favourite thing about driving it?
Well, on an evening we'll go out and sort of, if it's a lovely evening, we'll go out and cruise. No speeding, just cruise. We like the suspension dancing.
I bet you look
that's what we like.
fantastic.
Yeah. Well, if you want to come sometime, I'm right here.
Hey, let's go and do it. Right, we're off for a cruise. What a fantastic car, the Cadillac. Fabulous workmanship from America. But look at this old beauty, the Bentley from good old UK.
Looks like this is my lucky day.
We're off for a cruise. See ya. You're welcome.
This type of Bentley won at Le Mans 68 years ago. It's the 4.5 litre model. In fact, it's almost identical to the car I took on this year's classic Mille Miglia, the reenactment of the daunting 1,000-mile road race around Italy. I must say I had a fairly jaundiced view of pre-war classic cars. That was until I sat behind the wheel and tap danced my way around Italy. Yes, I did say tap dance. That's because in a contemporary car, you use your basic, natural, subconscious instincts to drive the car. But in this car, the Bentley, the middle pedal is the accelerator and the right-hand pedal is the brake. So when you have one of those rather dodgy moments and your right foot's on the accelerator and you want to go on the brake, then if you go to the left, you go onto the clutch. So when you eventually find the brake on the right, you've not only missed the turning, you've scattered the goat herd and ended up back in the vineyard yet again. And you think that's bad, then there's the gear change. When I was first acquainted with this car, I was told how to change the gear. You have to doubly clutch on upshift and downshift. You have to count to approximately 2 seconds before you engage the next gear. You mustn't use more than about 2,500 revs. Sounds complicated? It was, and it certainly is. And then there's stopping, the brakes. This car weighs 1.5 tons and it has 4 16-inch drum brakes. You've got more chance of winning the national lottery than stopping this car quickly. So if you don't mind, I think I'll concentrate on driving and get on the way to Alton Park. This car is no typical 4.5 litre Le Mans type Bentley. It was the original show car from the 1928 London Motor Show. W.O. Bentley built this model as a high-performance sports car to improve the marque's competitiveness on the track. Whilst this is the 4-seater, the 4.5 litre came in many different guises. That's because customers in the 1920s could order cars to their own personal specifications. all for the princely sum of 1,000 golden guineas. It's now worth 180 grand. The chassis is steel channel section with cross members, and suspension is semi-elliptical springs with double shock absorbers on the front. Filling up is done here, a credit card melting 45-gallon Le Mans spec tank. And the MPG, a highly respectable 16 miles to the gallon. Not bad for a 70-year-old car. The big lights and grille just say Bentley. And under the bonnet is the 4-cylinder 16-valve engine pushing out 110 brake horsepower. In fact, in its day, the 4.5-litre Bentley was a remarkably advanced car. It had brakes on all 4 wheels as opposed to 2 on more humble cars. It had a 4-speed gearbox, it had twin carburetors, there was a widespread use of aluminium, it had 2 spark plugs and 4 valves per cylinder, attached to a single overhead cam, an arrangement copied by Triumph 40 years later in the Dolomite Sprint. The 1928 Autocar road test simply effused about this car. They said it was one of the most pleasant and exciting cars to drive. A driver in tune with it would feel in full control, and that the car would do everything asked of it. Well, let's find out. In terms of performance, the car is surprisingly nippy, helped by the massive torque and pulling power of the low-revving engine. In fact, motor in 1928 achieved 90 miles an hour at 3,500 revs. At a time, in fact, when the legal speed limit on the road was 20 miles per hour. This car, in fact, can do 105 miles an hour. And as for handling, well, the steering is not exactly light, and the only power assistance comes from here. And then there's the chassis. Well, it's a bit like a Morgan in the sense that you feel every bump on the road. And also with this car, the chassis actually flexes as you go over an undulation, although I'm told that's what it should be doing. Bentley is probably the earliest British car that anybody associates with success on the racetrack, something now we've become rather used to with the great success of British motorsport. In fact, Bentley rather dominated Le Mans in the 1920s, and in 1928 won Le Mans with the 4.5-litre in the hands of Wolf Bonato and Bernard Rubin at an average speed of just under 70 miles an hour. My overall impression is, given its age and apart from the pedal arrangement and gear change, is that it's a remarkable car with some very pleasant driving characteristics. So it makes me wonder what car manufacturers have been doing for the last 70 years. It beats me.
Will Hoy there with a classic Bentley, but of course classic cars, as we've been saying all through this series, don't need to be expensive exotica. Beautiful Morris Minor here, owned by John Aston. John, your mother and father's car.
That's right. In 1959 he worked at Longbridge for 40 years, put his name down for the car, waited about 18 months to 2 years for his name to come up. He in turn then had notification to say the car was ready in Cowley. They then said, well, would you get the registration from the Birmingham registration office, phoned it down to Cowley, and in turn they made the number plates up, told him the car was ready, so they then got on the train, went to Cowley and collected the car and drove it home.
And it's been in your family ever since?
That's right.
And how many miles has it done now?
It's done 91,000.
And you probably know every one of those miles?
Well, no, I took over the car when my father died in 71.
Yeah.
And I've maintained it from day one. So.
And it's in beautiful nick. I mean, you know, any new parts on it really?
Yes. It had 2 new rear wings because they started to show signs, and a little bit of welding on the sills, but that's all really. And I converted the engine to unleaded about 18 months ago.
And does it still give you pleasure to drive it?
Oh yeah, beautiful day like this, leave the old Rover at home and come out in the modern Morris Minor.
And I mean, there's nothing on this that you can't get as far as spares are concerned.
That's right. Well, I took the head off 18 months ago and had it converted to unleaded. And of course, with all the suppliers that are around for Morris Minors, you can get every nut and bolt, part, body, mechanical, whatever you want, at a reasonable price.
Will you ever part with it?
Never. No, when I'm driving it, I think, well, my father sat here and he enjoyed it and I'm enjoying it.
John Aston there with a beautiful 2-door Morris Minor. Join us after the break.
Welcome back to Classic Motors. Me and Griff here are in the, can you guess? It's the Vauxhall camp, and I'm here with Howard and his beautiful Vauxhall Victor. How old is the Vauxhall Victor?
This one's a 1957 model, actually, yeah.
You can tell it's a lovely 50s design. Is it one of your favourite classic cars then?
Oh, it certainly is, yes. I think the styling has captivated me, quite honestly. It's a totally outrageous design.
How did it go down with the British public at the time, though?
Well, not too well, actually, but in fact, you know, over 4 years, 380,000 were built, and it proved a very successful export winner for the country.
Not bad. And
yeah.
when you're driving it along these days, a lot of people having a good look at you. Do you turn
indeed.
a lot of heads?
Yes, oh indeed.
In
yeah.
fact, Howard, what is your favourite memory of driving along in the car, or anything to do with the car?
Well, for me personally, it's the fact that this actually was similar to the very first Vauxhall that I had, the first car I had. But this is in far better condition than my first one.
Is that because you've done a lot of work on it?
Well, this one I bought actually as it is, but my very first car actually broke in half. They had such a terrible
well, that says a lot for
reputation
Vauxhall, doesn't it?
For being rust buckets. But
this one obviously hasn't got a bit of rust on it.
It certainly has, and I've gone back to my youth again, so to speak, you know, with getting the car I want. It's a lovely car to drive. You can see all four corners, and it's a really comfortable car, and I love it to bits.
And you've sold it to me there, Howard. Fantastic.
I don't think you could possibly afford it.
Okay. Well, one car that probably none of us would be able to afford is the Jaguar XJ220. Steve Vokins from the National Motor Museum takes the dust sheets off this old relic.
And this is the half Jaguar. It's a 1931 Austin 7 Swallow. Austin 7 with bodywork by Swallow Sidecars of Blackpool. They then went on to make the SS100 sports car, phenomenally successful car from the late 30s. But of course, towards the end of the 30s, the SS came to mean something rather less tasteful than sports cars, and so they changed their name to Jaguar. Now, before leaving this car, it's worth pointing out the reason it looks a bit shabby is it's a one-owner car. One owner from new this car's had, Mrs. McIntosh. She bought it when she was a young lady, and when she finally gave up driving, she gave it to the museum. And because it's so original, we're going to keep it that way. The next of the Jaguars is this XK150 Roadster from 1960. With a top speed of 125 from its 3.8 litre engine, it was the world's first production vehicle to have four-wheel disc brakes as standard. And at a little over £2,000, it was a third of the price of its Ferrari rival. Representing Jaguar's sporting heritage is this D-Type, which came second in the 1954 Le Mans. With a power output of 250 brake horse, it had a top speed of a near unbelievable 175 miles an hour, and its looks were the basis for the E-Type, of which this is a 1961 3.8 litre example. Even today, it still stops people in their tracks, so elegant and pure are its lines. The final Jaguar in the collection is a rather special one. It's big, in fact it's very big. It's also fast, very fast. And everyone who bought one in the 1980s as an appreciating classic had their fingers well and truly burned. It is, of course, the Jaguar XJ220. If every car makes a statement, then this is a loads of money car. It's cash over practicality. It's a typical late 80s money statement. The car doesn't need to be as big as this. The McLaren proved that. It's far, far too big. It's too ostentatious. It's difficult to drive. It's completely useless for the job of getting you from A to B. And if you think that's bad enough, have a look at the luggage space. It is completely laughable. You wouldn't even get a briefcase in there, look. Car's built from aluminium. It's very, very high tech. Cost £403,000. And you can buy them brand new now for 150 because no one wants them. This was the comeuppance for the investor brigade. But worse still, its legacy is a Jaguar management unwilling to develop other exotic show cars for production, such as the gorgeous XK180. Oh well, All aboard, time for a spin. Well, it's off for a joyride round the grounds of Bewley, and I must say it's incredibly noisy. And judging by the gearing of the thing, if it's got 5 gears, 200 miles an hour, we're not going to get much out of first gear, I don't think. It is very, very noisy, quite bumpy, and not what you'd expect from a Jaguar at all. Another thing is you just cannot see any corners, you can't see the sides. It's a very, very limited field of view. I'm glad I'm not driving it actually, I'm really very glad. Obviously it'd be nice to boast about that I've driven an XJ220, but frankly I wouldn't like to be the one to have to admit that I'd hit something in an XJ220. Now we're motoring. Well, motoring, yes, but not for long. At anything below motorway speeds, it can overheat very quickly. I think we'd best put it back, eh? Well, that was certainly different, but I think I prefer my Jags to be a bit more refined, a little quieter, and with that extra bit of headroom.
I remember the XJ220. It was the fastest depreciating car in history. Just by signing the order form, you lost £200,000. Not many cars can have that claim to fame. Of course, if you are into classic motoring, don't forget, let somebody else do the restoration. Buy the very best quality car you can afford. Don't think that you can buy something like this and do the work yourself or have it done by somebody else, because the cost will far outweigh the ultimate value of the car. That's all from this series. Don't let me put you off. Buy yourself a classic. See you next time.